I want to introduce today's guest as Brett Bender. Ursula wrote a really nice little background piece on him, so I just wanted to read that before we started.
Oh, sure.
Um, Brett Bender is a full time, independent, professional voice actor who lives on a farm in central Iowa, but he works globally with clients from all over the world. He can provide everything from the guy next door to someone more astute and authoritative, or warm and rich resonance with a caring and trustworthy feel for professional presentations, e learning modules, PSAs, documentaries, and commercials. He has regularly given voice development instruction for KHOI Community Radio and Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa, for the past 4 years. With charm and kindness, he provides a cross section of relevant information on how to prepare and care for your voice and how to build on your own skills with specific tricks of the trade. He will provide an outline of this information for future use. Afterwards, I think he's going to email me his outline. And he will answer questions that some may have about voice acting as a profession. And since we have a big group, I'm wondering if we just should pause every once in a while at Brett's convenience for questions. I think that might be good. So with that, I'll say thank you, Brett, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. Thank you for those kind words, and Ursula, thank you for writing those kind words. Yeah, my name is Brett. Yeah, I live in Iowa as well, out here on the farm. So it tends to be a good place to record because it's pretty quiet out here, aside from when it's planting and harvest time. But yeah, so thanks for tuning in. I'm glad that everyone went around and kind of told their position there at their stations and the work that they do. And thank you just also for taking the time to be here for this call and to listen to this information. The information too is it's kind of a bit of a catch-all in a lot of ways. It's like if anyone were to come up and talk to me about like, well, if you were to talk about like voice techniques or some advice that you give somebody who wants to learn like better ways to use their voice, this is the sort of information that I would provide. It's question or it's answers to questions that I've given a lot. So, like I said, it is a catch-all. So there might be a lot of stuff that you already know or that you're very much aware of. So if it's repeated material or stuff that you're already aware of, I do apologize, but I just try to cover all the bases as much as I can in all these different categories. So hopefully, at least everyone can get at least something out of this information. So I will see where it goes. But without further ado, I will share my screen if I can. Oh, there we go. Okay. Can everyone see that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so yeah, this is called the voice as a tool, voiceover techniques for a better performance. Um, so a few things that I'll go over or I'll talk about are just some simple things you can do or everyone can do to warm up, things that I do every day before hitting the record button. Also, other things to consider before hitting the record button, some very basic but important mic techniques. Also, the meat of the presentation is a lot to do with the basic ingredients of a good voiceover performance, and also things that you can do, just little tips that you can use to help you sound more natural while you're giving a performance. Now, I've said this before a lot too, is like that a lot of this stuff is geared towards written material, not necessarily if you're just, having an interview or just doing your on-air radio host sort of broadcast sort of thing. But a lot of this stuff can, intersect between the two as well. But when you guys were talking about the radio dramas, like I immediately thought of that. Like a lot of those radio dramas out, I feel like we're in this golden age of the radio, and to see radio dramas come back is wonderful. Yeah, and like Stephanie and Ursula said, if you have questions, I'll pause every now and again if you have a question. Also, if you have some pertinent question that might be worth asking at a particular time, if you could like raise your hand or something. I can't necessarily see you guys on this screen, so if you raise your hand though, maybe Stephanie or Ursula could say something just and we can interrupt. Okay, cool. So to start it off, I mean, no vocal performance is good without warming up. There are a few things that I say you should do every time. Now, I mean, there are definitely like when it comes to acting, especially in front of the microphone, because all that everyone can hear is your voice and your voice alone. So everything, all your emotion, all the texture, everything that you share comes through your voice. So it's very important to warm up for sure. But there are things that you can do over time that are really important, but I think these are good things to do every day before even hitting the record button. And the simple one is just to just simply hum and to shake out your body. Now I what I like to do is just like shake through my limbs as I'm shaking them, like when I wake up in the morning, just to wake up my body and wake up my vocal cords. The next thing I try to do every day before recording is to go up and down the the vocal range while vibrating your lips. So essentially just going, and when you do this, I know it sounds really weird, and it's good when you live alone or you don't have anybody around watching you or listening to you. But it's so important because that obviously warms you up in more ways than warms up your lips, warms up your vocal cords, just continues to warm up your body. And one thing I've noticed when doing this exercise is that it's probably not the best to push your range when you're warming up right first thing in the morning. So I'll keep it at a minimum. But the more that I get warmed up, I'll try to push my range, and I'll do it multiple times, and I'll try to continue to expand my range until I kind of get to the point where I can feel I push my limits both in the upper and the lower side. So one, it warms you up, and two, it kind of gives you a feel for where you're at when you start to hit the record button again. And obviously warming up is important just for general vocal health, but I think it's also important if anyone happens to be doing like some long form narration, or if you happen to be doing like a radio drama or something where you're trying to pick up where you left off. If your voice sounds different, which it does, throughout the day, the morning versus the evening, or when you're warmed up versus when you're not, your voice sounds different. So if you can get it to sound as close to the same as possible, like if you're doing any sort of long form thing that takes multiple days to do, that you're just going to sound more consistent, because that's just another thing that's going to distract the listener. If I could boil like any sort of thing that I would tell anybody that wants to do anything on the radio in a vocal performance, or even some sort of vocal performance, to me it would be breath work. That is the most important thing, because I know if one is not conscientious of recording on air or recording with their voice or using their voice as a tool, we probably don't pay as much of attention to that. But probably more so with our group here would be more aware of this. But it's really important to get deep breaths so that you can control where you pause within a script, or where you can control where you pause within a presentation, or how you're using your voice. If you're limited to the air supply that you have because you unconsciously only breathe in a certain amount and maybe breathe in shallowly, you're going to have to just top up your breath in the middle of a sentence, and all of a sudden you're disrupting the momentum of whatever information you're trying to convey. So it's good to have a full tank of breath at all times, one, to not distract from the actual performance itself, and one, to also choose for yourself when the pauses are going to be. So that can also affect your ability to communicate with the people or whoever you're trying to talk to. So this exercise is just very simple. It's just basically trying to breathe down into your diaphragm, hold it for 6 seconds, and then breathe out very slowly on an F sound for 6 seconds. If you do this maybe like 10 times, one, you just get a feel for like how much air you can hold. And also it'll help expand those lungs. So over time, you'll just automatically, unconsciously hold that breath in your diaphragm. So it's not even an issue at that point. And then you can even, once you hold that in your diaphragm, when you get to a certain spot, you can stop and you can just top off your breath and just keep air in your lungs. So you're not like pausing all of a sudden and then continuing on. You're using just small breath intakes at a particular pause, so you're not interrupting the script or the performance that you're trying to give. And like the picture shows, a good way to do this, or a good way to know if you're really expanding your lungs, is just put your hands on the side, like just below or at the very bottom of your rib cage. You can feel your rib cage expand, and if you're doing it properly, you should feel it expand quite a bit. But it's just a good bar to get started. Let's see. Obviously, another one is yawning. Yawning just does so much. One, it stretches the vocal cords, it stretches the mouth, it stretches the jaw. It just does so much just when it comes to vocal performance. I mean, just yawning constantly is a good thing in that regard. Another one is like the lady is showing here. It's called the wine cork exercise. This is something to do. I mean, the more you do it, the better. The tongue is a muscle. If you can exercise that muscle, you can use articulation. You can articulate things far better than you could otherwise. And that's especially important if you're reading very quickly, or if you have some, very, I don't know, medical scripts or what I think of automatically. But it's just wine cork exercise will pay dividends if you have really dense material that you need to share. But all it basically is holding a piece or a wine cork in your mouth and just read a page of material. What's really astonishing about this is how much the tongue works in that process, because when you don't have your jaw and when you don't have your mouth moving to help mitigate the tongue moving, the tongue has to overwork itself just to articulate that certain sound, especially T's and D's and things like that. So if you read a page of material with a wine cork in your mouth, you'll notice right away that your tongue will get very slow, very, very sore. And if you do it for a long period of time, you'll notice that your articulation just gets better because you've exercised your tongue more. Another is obviously tongue twisters. And I put this on here, but I'll just put it in that outline that I'll email to you, Stephanie. It's called the Tongue Twister Database, and I think it was created by some speech pathologists. And it's essentially just a database, this giant 15-page thing of different tongue twisters that you can use. It's just a great thing to go to. And one thing I've noticed, I don't know if whoever has perused the tongue twisters, is that if you do it a lot, if you do the same one all the time, you just get kind of used to it. Like you can do it really fast. So you need a new one to challenge yourself and to really, really, practice working with your articulation. So that thing has like 15 pages of good material. So I'll put that in the outline as well, though, if anyone wants to dabble in those. Next is things to consider before recording. Now, these are things that probably you might all know this, but I'll share it anyway. And the reason that I like to share it too, though, is because I've heard a lot of on-air talent, especially on like the national or NPR, that you can tell that they're not hydrated. And it's just distracting to me because I'm so used to hearing those sounds. But when you hear it all the time, it becomes so distracting. I can think of a few IPR people in particular that I know they have a cup of coffee in front of them, and it just bothers me because it's like, please have water while you're on the air and go drink your coffee on another time, because you're just distracting from the material you're trying to share. So easily enough just to keep hydrated, which can go all the way back to the night before. So if if it was a late night for you or something like that, that can affect your ability to perform well the next day. My go-to is just water, or lemon water, actually, is room temperature lemon water. That is my absolute go-to all the time. Obviously, there are other things too. They say that green apples are some magic cure, throat lozenges. Actually, just got a dry throat spray today. So they have like the one in the picture, but I just got one called Singer's Soothing Throat Spray. I just got it today, and I tried it out, and it is the bee's knees. I highly recommend it. It doesn't taste the best, but it helps immensely, especially if you're doing long form, or you're talking for hours and hours on end, doing like an audiobook, or just something long form where you're talking so much that your voice is getting hoarse. That stuff can help a lot. Obviously, no dairy or caffeine, unfortunately. Let's see. Oh, and I also like to mention this too. This is more for new people, but it definitely becomes an issue. Is for some reason, like, new people that get on air or get behind a microphone, when the record, like, they're fine, like they're just fine chatting or talking or whatever. But the moment you hit the record button, like they get all tensed up and they start using their radio voice and all this stuff. And it's like, and that can also affect your, like, give you dry mouth, or give you, like, you won't be hydrated. Like, if you're stressed, you get this dry mouth. You get dry mouth, you get these artifacts in your sound from the microphone. And so I always tell people, like, think about things you can do to help calm yourself before when the record button is hit, like, that you're calm then too. Because if you have nerves, it's obviously going to give you dry mouth, which is going to affect your recording, but it's also going to affect, like, the way that you present yourself too. So that's always my newbie go-to, is like, well, first of all, two things. We got to talk about, like, when the record button's hit, nothing's changed. The only fact is we have it, like, recorded now. Unless it's live, then that's a big issue. But if it's recorded, we can go back, we can edit it. So don't worry about that. Yeah. Okay. How we doing? Any questions or anything? Am I going too fast, too slow? Is this probably rudimentary stuff a lot?
Any questions out there?
I'm good. Okay.
So far, so good.
Okay. Okay. So these are also probably just reiterating information, some of the information that you guys already are aware of, but mic technique, condenser mics, they always say 6 inches. I always use that's how far away I am from this microphone right now. This microphone right now, it's a condenser, but it's actually pointed right here. So when I'm looking at you at the script right here, it's pointing at like this right here. And the reason I put it like this is, well, one, I can get really close, but also because of plosives. Because if I'm off axis from this mic, and again, if I'm sorry if I'm repeating information that you guys are already aware of, but I'll share it anyway. But when it comes to plosives, obviously plosives are a huge issue, especially if you're on air. You can't go back and you can't edit them, so, and they just become a distraction over time. So the best thing to do is to try to train them out of your delivery, but also put your microphone off axis. So like I got mine, just pointed down right here. So when I talk, when my P's go, they're going this way. They're not going to go right into the diaphragm of the microphone. I know a lot of people say like, they want to talk right into the microphone. And maybe that's the case with a dynamic, like the Shure SM7B or the Shure, I think it's SM58. Anyway, some standard condenser mics. Like I always see like podcasters and radio hosts like being right up next to them, or the Electro Voice RE20. I think that's a dynamic, but they get up right next to them. And maybe it's fine with a dynamic because it's not as sensitive. But I know with a condenser microphone, like being off axis is super important, because the more on axis I am, the more that these plosives become an issue, or that pop becomes an issue. Another thing too is to just train it out of your delivery. If it becomes an issue, especially with a dynamic mic, if you're, constantly talking directly at the mic and you're popping your P's all the time, the only thing I could suggest in that, aside from dealing with it in post, which is probably not what you want to do, is to train it out of you, or and the best way to do that, like I found, is to just practice saying stuff with P's with your hand in front of your mouth, and just slowly try to back off of the air. Because obviously with the microphone, you're right next to the microphone. That P sound, you think it's not going to come through because you can't hear it as much as you normally would say in normal conversation, but it always comes through. So if you can, tone down your P's just instinctually, it takes practice, but that's another way to deal with it. If, somebody has some people have more of an issue with it than others. It just kind of depends on, your speech pathology. But, another thing you can do too, though, is it's called the pencil trick. And I've seen people hook them up to their microphones, where they like actually put a pencil and wrap and rubber band it around the capsule, or like right in front of the capsule. So when they talk into it, it just displaces that air, so it never actually fully hits the capsule. So that's another option. Of course, the next one is Sibilance. Sibilance is one of my biggest enemies, but obviously a few issues that can cause sibilance. Sibilance is the mic choice. Sometimes you don't have a choice in what mic you're using, but it's just the way it is. Some mics are brighter than others. Sometimes it comes out more in like female vocals versus male vocals, just because of the frequency range.
Hey, Brett.
But, yeah.
Could you define sibilance?
Oh, sure. Sibilance is just basically the harsh S sounds coming out, because the microphone is so delicate, or is so sensitive to to everything that we say, that the S sound in particular can become overpronounced, and it can come out super harsh in the recording. It's not as clear as it could be, if that makes sense.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah. And so so the only thing I can say to combat this is to train it out of your delivery. I know like people use de-essers, and that's wonderful. But like my adage is, if you don't have to deal with it in post, then don't. Like, if we're going to deal with it, we should deal with it on the front end before we have to deal with it in post. Because at that point, when you're editing it, you're going to deal with a bunch of artifacts, and who's to say you're getting the frequency right? And the frequency changes between different people. They have different frequencies. So I don't know, de-esser if you're a producer or an engineer, by all means, that's cool. But my suggestion, is to try to train it out of yourself. If you do have just harsh S's, some do, some don't. But one way to deal with a harsh S sound, if somebody has super sibilance, is to have them do an S and then a Z, and see where the tongue lands in your mouth. If you see where the S lands, like the tongue lands closer to the front of your teeth, and the Z sound kind of lands just to the back of it. And it's almost like you want to like combine the two. You almost want to like back off the S and bring in a little bit of that Z. Another aspect you can do is to open your mouth more. Like if S, S, S. Like if you open up your mouth a little bit more as you say your S's, they just don't come out as sibilancy.
And we have another question.
Yeah.
What is a bright mic?
A bright mic is, I don't know if you've seen like the frequency charts on microphones. But if you ever look at a frequency chart on a microphone, I don't know, some people think like a gold standard for them is to have something as flat as possible, as has to be as like actual as possible. Essentially all the chart is, though, for those that maybe don't know, is it's the frequency range of that the mic picks up when it picks up a sound. So cheaper mics tend to have more of a big dynamic range change, and it's harder to hone in on like tuning that mic to your voice or to whatever you're trying to record. But a bright mic is going to pick up a lot of those high frequency ranges. It's going to pick up a lot. So like the human Sibilance range is about 6K to 10K ish. So some mics are super like sensitive to that area, and it makes sense because it's where a lot of the vocal range is for humans, is between like 4 to 5K to 10 to 12 or something like that. Anyway, that's kind of like where we talk through, is that frequency range. So a mic that's really sensitive in that area, which can be good, can actually be kind of negative depending on what kind of vocal technique you have. Sorry, I'm talking at you, but on the other side. But yeah, so a bright mic would just be one that's more sensitive to those higher frequencies that fall right within the range of your S's or just T's, or that particular area. Thank you for the question. That's a good question. Okay. Another mic basics, I guess. Like I said, this is kind of a catch-all, but I like to mention polarity patterns just for people who aren't aware, because some people don't even know that the microphone that they've used this whole time has a particular polarity pattern, and that can just affect how you record. So I mean, obviously the most common one is the cardioid. You'll see that all the time. The shotgun is great for like really isolated sound, but you'll get also like the figure eight, which is great for, I don't know, maybe having an interview or something over the same microphone, and an omnidirectional for if you want to actually encompass all these sounds, if you're out in public and you want to record like the environment or something like that. But I just like to mention it that, yeah, the most general pattern is the cardioid one, or the most prominent one in microphones, or the one people will probably see most often. Obviously, the higher end mics have options to change the polarity patterns, which is awesome. But I do like to mention it, though, just so people are aware, like what is getting picked up from their microphone. So whatever environment they're in, they're aware of it. If you're not in the studio and you're taking, say, like a Zoom recorder out, like knowing what kind of like pattern that recorder has is good for like how close to get to the interviewee, or how close to get to the thing, or what else is going to pick up, or anything like that. Just, yeah, and then condenser versus dynamic. Yeah, the condenser is just more sensitive. Dynamic's going to be less sensitive, more durable. Flatter response with condenser mics usually, like we were talking about with the frequency pattern. Okay, how are we doing? Doing good? Okay. Let's see here. Okay. All right. So that kind of covers the basic introductory techniques. Now I'm going to get into a little bit of the vocal techniques, or the secret sauce, I like to call it. This the ingredients that you'd use and you pay attention to and you'd hone in, so that you can tweak each one individually. You can add a dash of this, you can give a bit of that to give the best performance possible. I like this first quote too. We need to relearn to consciously speak naturally and then apply voiceover principles to that delivery. And it's simple, but also at the same time, it's just so odd how, I mean, and this is something that I've had to break into myself over the years, is that we spend our younger years like learning how to read. And a lot of people, I think, learn how to read by like saying it in their head and then they see it on the page, and then that's like a way to learn to read when you're younger. And we never actually, like, we don't go beyond that. Now the problem with that is, I mean, it's fine when you're reading, but it's not fine when you're actually trying to read to convey like a natural performance. Like, it's not on the page, but rather you that's saying it. It's not coming from a written material. So speaking naturally, speaking consciously, it's almost like, yes, we have to relearn what it means to speak naturally. I mean, it's, you know, it's just something that we're born with, and we grow up and we learn it. But when you really start to look at it and reverse engineer it and see all the aspects that it's made of, then you can tweak it and you can try to understand it better. But, you know, if you're just going to read some material on a page and try to convey like some conversational read, it's just not going to work. Like, you have to know the ingredients and the techniques that we just use on a day-to-day basis in speaking naturally that we want to convey through the written material or whatever we're trying to convey. A few things too, just an overview before getting into the ingredients, is that when we're recording, there's a slightly higher projection than we have when we're normally talking. When we're talking into a microphone, there's a slightly higher projection. And I don't know why, but like, maybe it's just because as a listener, like, all you have is their ear. You don't have anything visual that you can offer them. Therefore, you have to deliver everything emotionally and everything through sound. And so to do that, you have to give it a little bit additional projection, a little bit extra emphasis, not like overly emphasizing something, but just definitely like to be present with it, to really drive the thought home, and not just, just to talk naturally and like you normally would or something like that. There might be the time to do that, but ultimately you're just going to give a slightly higher projection. Also, the thing that I try to hammer in all the time with people that I teach this to is the humanization aspect of this. Like, it's always good to remember, and forgive me if this is just repeating information, but it's always good to remember that on the other side of this microphone is an ear. And more so these days than ever before, it's an earbud. Somebody walking down the street in their car or going for a walk or whatever, but it's just you in their ear. So like, technically, like, the microphone is their ear. So if you can imagine that you're just talking to one person, and one person in particular, not just like one random person, but somebody specific, that whatever material you're trying to convey, you've picked somebody that, one, is like interested and willing to hear it, but also that you can put it in the context of like, this is why I'm telling you this. It's not just because it's cool, but because like, here's the context of why I'm telling you. So I think humanizing all this stuff is what makes the good performances great, is when you as a listener feel connected to what the person is saying, that they're speaking directly to you as the listener, like just you and you alone. Like with the pandemic and everything, we're becoming more isolated, and I feel like that's just, made listening to podcasts and the radio and everything just go up even more. It's like people are more isolated, so they want to feel even more connected. So humanization is such an important aspect. Also, pitch variation is slightly more amplified than it would be if you're just having a normal conversation. Again, for like I said before about the projection. Also, pay special attention to not over enunciating things, especially if you start doing the wine cork exercise. You'll start to realize that you can articulate very well, and it's very easy to over enunciate. There's actually a gentleman who does the commercial or the promo work for our IPR station, and I don't know if they've taught him this or what, but he's very like articulate, and he's very like, he speaks like a robot, and it jars me every time. It's like it grates me every time because it's so dehumanized. He's so over enunciating and over articulating. But we'll go over that a little bit later too. And then finally, this is always the way I like to look at this, is that our goal, or a goal in a vocal performance with copy, is to lift it off the page, is to paint feelings with words, is to give feelings with these words, that they're not actually the words on the page. They're the words of the person talking about them, or presenting the material. Those are the words. The words on the page are just a guidepost. Like, that is the actual performance, is you talking. Okay. And finally, before getting into the ingredients, flow is incredibly important when it comes to giving performance, because we just do it naturally in conversation all the time. We learn the ebb and flows of going back and forth, of when it's our turn to talk, when it's somebody else's turn to talk, when to emphasize a point and really drive it home. Like, we have this way of just flowing through what we say, and we know where to pause, we know where to get a breath. We just unconsciously know it. Now, of course, when we give a performance, we kind of have to relearn these things, and we have to learn where the best time is to stop for a breath. And sometimes it can be hard to break that choppiness of reading the page and then saying the words to where it doesn't sound natural, where that flow is created. But ultimately, it just takes a lot of practice and skill in the end, like everything else. And I like to use the metaphor of like learning to drive a car. It's like when you first learn to drive a car, all you can do is know the brake pedal, the gas, like you just know very few things. And you're like, well, I got to do this. Well, I also have to learn to stop at the right time, and the distance between a car, like just so many things. And at first you're just overwhelmed. You're like, I can only focus on this thing and that's it. But over time, it just become natural. Where like now we can go to higher level things like, what roads to take and all this other stuff. So the same goes for this. A lot of it just takes practice, and a lot of it can just be overwhelming. It's just a lot of information. But the more you pay attention to it, the more you start to see it, not only in just conversation, but also in yourself, in your own conversation, and when you're talking to people, in how you like try to drive a point home, and the way that you do it, the way that you emphasize certain words. It's all part of that. Okay, now for the ingredients. Does anyone have any questions, or just wanted to stop real quick? I guess I don't have. We're good. Okay. So now these are the ingredients. Like, if you could disseminate, I don't know, the different aspects of a vocal performance, and if you could break them apart and you could really study each one of them, so you could learn how to tweak them or add a dash of this and a little bit of that, take a little bit of that away, it can really affect your ability to perform. It can really affect your ability to convey whatever information you're trying to convey through your script. The first one I like to touch on, because it's the simplest, or the quickest to see and the hardest to break, is your tempo. A lot of people, when they first start to read, especially when they're nervous, like I was saying earlier, you hit the record button, you get nervous, you read really fast, you go really fast. Now, obviously, there's a problem with that, because it's going to convey information that you're not trying to convey. It's going to show that, like it says here, like, could mean it's upbeat, excited, vigorous, just something that like very, very specific, and also slower too. It could mean like you're sad, or you're serious, or you're sentimental. But one thing to keep in mind, though, too, is unconsciously, when people try to speed up or slow down, that they'll either decrease their energy. They'll decrease their energy when slowing down. Also, when they speed up, they'll tend to like raise their voice for some reason. Like, instead of just keeping the same voice and you speed up all the time, you go really fast. They'll like speed up all the time, they go really fast, and they'll raise their voice. Like they'll shake their volume up. And also, when people slow down, they tend to like slow down their energy too. But it isn't that though. Like, you can slow down and keep good energy, so again, this is just like normal conversation too. You slow down, but if you can just break that apart and try to slow things down without decreasing your energy or without raising your volume, that's very important. But the first aspect that I would look at in a script is like what sort of tempo you're at. Now, in normal conversation, you're just going to get a feel for that. It's going to have sort of somewhere in between, but also, as we'll see later on, like, tempo isn't just about like, okay, I'm going to do this rhythm, two, and we're just going to go. Like, no, conversation doesn't work that way. Like, just what I just said, like, conversation moves really fast and then it goes really slow. So it's like, it's almost finding that, I don't know, that proper pace for the certain phrases that need that slow articulation, that need to present something serious, or the fast one that can just be like, throw it away, or like, dude, this is really exciting. Two different things just based on tempo alone. Yeah, again, like I said, changing tempo. Otherwise, yes, it sounds just monotonous and repetitive. And ultimately, what we're trying to get away from here is uninteresting, because one, with our day and age of so much information out there at our fingertips, and we have our phones, and our attention spans are getting shorter, you lose people a lot quicker now than you did in the past. So it's very important to keep this stuff in mind when doing a performance, or going over air, or or being on the mic, because you can lose people in like 5 seconds. They're gone. It used to be like 20 seconds or something, but now it's like 5. So you got to continuously be interesting and continuously change it up and add variety and make it interesting. Otherwise, it's just, if it's monotonous or repetitive, you're going to lose them. Okay. Oops. Okay. So the next one is rhythm. So essentially, I mean, as we know, like with drumming and everything, it's which words you choose to attack, like da 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 da, like just the certain rhythm that you give when you're talking. Which words do you stress? Do you actually stress words? Do you continue to stress the same words? This is very important. People tend to, what I notice in especially like amateur beginner status people, especially like I see it a lot in journalism because, listening to the radio or podcasts or NPR or something, you can tell the ones that are new, or at least they haven't learned yet, is that they get stuck in this rhythm. It's like da 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 da. Like they don't understand the story enough to emphasize certain words and then to back off of others. And they just come across as sounding just repetitive, and they sound the same all the time. And then that's the information that they give, and that's all that they have. And then there you go. And then the story's over. And it's like, well, you lost me at the beginning because you just started getting in this repetition. So first step in rhythm is to understand when you get stuck in rhythm. And it's easy to see when you get stuck in rhythm because you lose the meaning of what you're saying. I mean, even you as a performer can feel when you're losing connection with whatever you're reading or whatever you're saying, to make it to where it sounds redundant or monotonous. And I think rhythm is one of the hardest ones to break once you get stuck in the rut, because you get stuck in this rhythm of da 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 da, and then all of a sudden everything sounds like that until you're done, and it just sounds like that. So a few tips if you do get stuck in this rut, and a lot of people do, especially beginners and amateurs, is to remove all the punctuation in your script. Because what I noticed right away, and this went for me too, for the longest time when I feel I get stuck in this rut, I just go and remove all the punctuation, because what happens is it removes in the brain your reading process that you've always thought ever since growing up, that this is where you pause. This is where the period is. This is where you think this or whatever. And then all of a sudden you're not performing. You're just reading something off a page, which is totally different. So if you take away the punctuation, suddenly you take away the meaning or the context behind the script itself, and you kind of break yourself of that rhythm. It's like, whoa, there is no, period or semicolon for me to give this pause, or for me to lilt on this word. Like it's all gone. So now it's just a bunch of gibberish. Now I can see the rhythm that's happening. So it just helps you understand the rhythm. Another good trick too is to speak the syllables of the words rather than like the word itself. So if you focus on syllables alone, you can start to feel like the musical intonation of words as you say them. It sounds a little weird until you really start to do it. If you go through material and you just pay attention to the syllables and just speak the syllables, you'll start to see the rhythm in the syllables alone, and how it's easy to get stuck in that rut of just da 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 da. I'm going to give you a quick example. I actually just heard this on the radio yesterday. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's the perfect example of this rhythm issue. It's from NPR, and this lady. So just listen and see if you can hear her rhythm issue. She is definitely stuck in a rut.
The best educational environment I can.
Can you hear that? Yeah. Okay. So see if you can hear her. Wait, where did it go?
For years, police departments across the country have struggled to recruit more women.
The best educational environment I can.
Tom Mahoney is a retired criminal justice professor who spent more than 2 decades in policing in California. In the 1980s, he researched how police are trained. Back then, Mahoney predicted law enforcement agencies would struggle to recruit and retain officers unless they changed their training.
Can you hear that? Like she was just like in the same pattern of da 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 da. Like she's not actually performing this stuff. She's just reading it off of a page, and it just comes across in this same rhythm of da 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 da. She just keeps repeating yourself over and over again. And at least when I was listening to this, I'm like, one, this is a great example of how you can easily get stuck in the rut of rhythm. And two, like, I'm not really getting the information that you're sharing, aside from the interview splices that are in there. Like, I get that, but I don't get what you're saying, because I really have to pay attention to the words you're saying, as opposed to just you trying to tell a story, which is what you're doing. Okay.
Question while you're switching there.
Whoops. Yeah.
Across the country.
Yeah.
Brad,
Here's police departments across.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Brad, do you, when you have a script, do you mark up your script? And if you do so, how do you do that? What marks do you use for yours as an aid?
That's a great question, and I definitely do. I definitely do every script. Like, my usual way of going about like a new script that I just get, like getting auditions in the middle of the day. I'll read it like 2 or 3 times over, not saying a word, just so I can get like what it's trying to say. You know, because there's always a subtext to anything, even if it's just like a short little like, please donate to the station. Even that is a story. And like understanding the context behind, like this, the subtext in that is to understand the meaning that's trying to be conveyed. So that's where I start. And then when it comes to marking it up, like obviously I put marks where the breaths are going to be. That's important, you know, so you know when to top up. So you're not thinking about that, or you're not, you know, doing a giant inhale at the wrong time. Also, another is which words to hit, which we'll go over too. Like, there are certain words, depending on what you're saying, that you hit a certain word, like I just did. Like, I hit the word hit so that it draws emphasis on that word. In the same way, in a script, it just, I highlight the words that I need to hit, just to make sure that the meaning is getting across. So I'm not overthinking it while I'm reading it, that I can just go into it and I know subconsciously that that's a word that's got to be hit, and it just comes out. Another one is, and I'll go over this here in a second, is inflection. That's an important one too. It's like, there are certain points where you need to inflect upward, and then you continue on. And there are certain times where you need to stop, and then you know, and then you'll go on. It kind of depends on where it's at, because it's not necessarily at the period is when you need to stop. The end of a thought might be in the middle of a sentence. It just kind of depends. But knowing that information is important. So hitting words, where to take a breath, where to pause, also where to take a pregnant pause. So just things like that. Essentially, just like I don't know, like musical notes sort of thing. You know, it's like, this is how I feel it sounding to make a good performance. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I see Margaret has a question too.
Yeah.
You'll have to unmute Margaret.
I'm not right.
Here we go.
I'd like you to say a few words about the ending sentences with the ever popular upward inflection, or a downward reflection, or just straight flat out, you know. And also, I've heard a lot, people tend to drop off the last bit of a sentence. So maybe they're giving a phone number and they'll say 923-4328, you know, and you don't get to hear the last bit of information, and maybe a couple of exercises to do, or just to be aware of that.
Sure. Well, I'll thank you for the questions, Margaret. And those are great questions. That your last question, there's a great technique you can use so you don't trail off. And in the voiceover world, we call it talking through the end of the sentence. And yeah, it kind of comes naturally, you know, when you first start and you're trying to read a script or whatever, and like you just kind of trail off at the end, and then you're done. You know, it's like you see the ending coming, so you're like, well, I guess I'm just done now. You know, like, and so you kind of trail off. But there's a way to combat that, or a trick that I would give is to talk through. They call it talking through the sentence, and essentially you make the sentence longer than that. Like you make it go beyond that. Not that you're going to say it, but you're going to think it. So like you said, like if you're like, you know, call, you know, 866-425-35 to hear more, like just add that in your head. So where you're like, yeah, 866-235-35 or 866-235-35, you know, it's just something to like tell yourself, to trigger something in yourself, that there's more to the thought than just where the period stop or where it stops. You know, just to make sure that you go through it, if that makes sense. but that's a hard one too, or it can be initially, but but talking through it, like, the beginning and the end are important to where you start and where you end. Starting can be hard if you don't, you can kind of like fizzle in and be like, well, it was a nice time, and then we did this and we did this. It's like you got to start strong, like, well, it's a nice time. So what I'll do at the beginning of a sentence is I'll even like talk myself into that sentence. So like, say that the start of the sentence is, we went to the store. I would say like, well, Frank, guess what we did? We went to the store. Like, then you can talk yourself into it. And so you have full energy when you start, as opposed to just, boom, I'm starting, like, we went to the store, like there's something about just like talking yourself into it that gives you a little backstory before even beginning. And it gives like this continuity to you telling a story, as opposed to just like, I'm starting here now and I'm ending here now, if that makes sense. And then to answer your other question.
Question from Davine.
Yes, the previous question touched on one of my pet peeves too, where people finish the sentence like that. I hate that.
I concur.
And it's awful, and it's very NPR-ish.
What do they call that? Uptalk? I think they call it uptalk. It's actually, I don't know, maybe my humor's dry, but it's one of my favorite little jokes to do. It's like, you can change so much about one thing that you say just by making it a question, or just by inflecting at the end. It's like, you look nice today? Like, it's good to see you. Like, it just changes it so much. But inflecting at the end. Yeah. Like, I mean, in a question, it's okay. But when to me, it's like vocal fry too. It's like, you think you're sounding nice, but you're actually sounding bad. And it's actually grating to the listener when you think you're doing something good. Inflecting at the end, to me, it just I don't know, oozes like a feeling of insecurity of the person talking. Also, Margaret, does that answer your question about the inflection as well? Or?
Yes, it does. I've taken some drama classes, and one of the things that was emphasized in drama was that an upward inflection at the end of a statement, not a question, upward inflection weakens the statement, and a downward inflection gives it oomph, power, strength. And so I try to be really careful about that. But a question, of course, it's appropriate, but you don't have to emphasize it like that. And it falls into that category that you were talking about of habitual rhythms,
Oh yeah, like that.
Yeah, like that. Thank you.
Verbal tics. Yeah. Just to dovetail off what you said, Margaret, too, about like ending down, like inflecting down, and like that's the end of the thought. Like that's important too in conversation, because that's signaling to the listener or to the person you're talking to that I'm done with that thought. And then, you can chime in, or I'm going to go on to the next thing. And so it's an important for the listener to know this inflection's happening. Now, the problem too is just the opposite, or it has the same issue as the upward inflection can have. Like the upward inflection can say like a question, or it can say like insecurity, or it can say like maybe something else is coming. Like, you just don't know. In the same way, the downward inflection can say that's the end. But like we were talking about with the rhythm thing before too, is that people can get stuck in this downward. And I've heard it a lot too, where like the repetition is, and they're taught, like there's, like you were saying, like there's this emphasis and there's this finality and something good that comes with the downward inflection. That's good unless something else is coming after that you're piggybacking off of what you just said. So if you're like, well, we went into the room, and then what? It's like, you can't say we went into the room and then we found a pumpkin and then we carved the pumpkin. It's like, you can't just end every phrase with a downward inflection. It's like, that's not how we talk in conversation. It's the end of the thought, the final thought, as opposed to, it's like a phrase of it's like a bunch of thoughts coming into a conclusion, as opposed to just every sentence is going downward. So, yeah.
David, did you have a question?
Well, I did, but I realized it was probably going down a philosophical rabbit hole, so I'm going to withdraw it.
I see
Well, there's time
Davine.
later.
Yeah, right.
Davine had another question too.
So you mentioned exercises at the beginning, which I find very helpful. As you age, the voice gets scratchy. And is there an exercise for that? Do you know what I mean? You know, some people's voices get kind of scratchy.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of, I mean, is that, well, the voice can scar too if it's overused or abused, or there are ways that this can happen very easily, where you can develop like calluses or like bumps on your vocal cords, and these can actually cause like these sort of things in your voice over time if you don't take care of it. And that sort of stuff is almost like, it's just what you have with what you have. And there's, I mean, aside from like warm-ups, articulation, making sure that when you are recording that you're well hydrated and completely warmed up, and that you've practiced your range exercises, and there are a lot of different exercises to do, but making sure that you're very warmed up. That's about all you can do. And making sure that before you get hoarse, or before you see you're losing your voice, don't stop, and know your limits, because that over speaking can change your voice too. A good example is Tony Robbins. If you hear his voice now, he sounds like this, and he's not that old. And I think it's just because he spends so much of his life talking, like constantly talking constantly, that he's created these calluses on his vocal cords, and now he just kind of sounds a little hoarse, and so I don't know if there are any sorts of exercises per se, but just that taking care of it and making sure that you're warm, you're as warm as possible, and then stopping before you strain yourself, because that can cause calluses and can cause scarring. Or shouting, I guess that can do that too. But it's like we grow up and you shout and go to a concert and you're yelling, and then you suddenly don't have a voice the next day. You don't think about in the future how that might affect the way you're going to sound in 20-30 years, but it could if you damage it enough. It's possible. So I don't know if that helps, but
David, it looks like you're going to try again for a question.
Yeah, this time I have something that I hope is helpful to this specific conversation. I've realized that my voice, the pitch of my voice has raised as I've gotten older. And I noticed this with my dad too. And I've realized that if I do the warm-ups, it drastically mitigates that. And so, Davine, I wonder if doing more warm-ups more regularly, like maybe even do warm-ups every day, even if you're not planning on doing any voice work, just to keep your vocal cords limber. Don't overdo it, but just exercise them every day.
Yeah, exercise. That's a good way to. Yeah, it's good thinking. I agree, and not strain yourself. Don't push yourself, especially too early in the morning. Before you're warmed up, if you're pushing yourself, that can cause issues. I've had that happen to me where I'm like working on script and I'm like, well, I got to have this done by 10 a.m. It's going to take me 5 hours. So I got to get going at like 5 a.m. And, it's like, you're not warm at that time unless you wake up at 1 or 2. And so then at that point I pushed myself and I didn't have a voice for like 3 days. It's like, well, you did that to yourself, but learn where your limits are and don't push yourself. It's like, I guess like stretching and exercise or anything like that. You got to be warmed up before you start to push yourself.
We have another question from Heather.
Yes, I just so appreciate this today. So I just want to know, when you're talking about exercise, what are you referring to exactly?
Vocal warm-ups, like I mentioned earlier about like doing the.
Okay, all right, okay.
That sort of stuff. You're just making sure that you're warm enough. I mean, that could also be, doing the, it could be like massaging the jaw. It could be, I don't know. There's all sorts of things you can do. And a quick Google search of vocal warm-ups will bring up a lot of stuff. They've been doing this for a long time. And so there's just a lot of material out there. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. Should we keep going?
Let's keep going.
All right. Let's see. We've been there. So this one we already went over, but just to talk about a few specific points. Yes, articulation is great. I think the wine cork exercise is a great one to do on a regular basis to practice if you do have articulation issues. Now, I will say I think that just practice is good in general, especially to combat mumbling or slurred speech that a lot of people can have. And I mean, some of it you have to go to a speech pathologist or something like that to correct. But in a lot of ways, if a lot of it is actually kind of lazy mouth, or we just over time just kind of, it's like whatever, I don't know. The example here is like bath, day, and journey. So bath uses the mouth, or the mouth uses the lips, but if you hold it too long, it sounds like bath. Like the M comes from the same spot. Bath is more of a automatic, but is like holding it from the back of the throat. So articulation can help combat that, where you're saying bath instead of just bath. And the same thing can go with day. Like that's exactly where the N comes from too. So it's more of like de, as opposed to de. Journey too. So just, it's one thing to keep in mind, and one thing that practicing articulation exercises like the what is it called? The tongue twisters and the wine cork exercise can help combat. And a lot of it too is just paying attention to that. Like I didn't really notice I had these lazy mouth things, and I think we all have them to a certain extent, especially if you don't like practice to not have them. But I would see them just in my recording. Like I would just see it on the screen. Like I use Adobe Audition, and they have like this, it's called like a spectral frequency display, and it shows you exactly like how, like what frequency something's at, and like how loud it is. And I can see where those M's and those N's and those N's are in those words. And I'm like, there it is. And I can physically see it on the screen. And I mean, like you could go in and like physically edit it. You could just manually edit it out, but that's not going to solve the issue long term. You're not going to edit out every single lazy mouth thing that you do. But it might not seem like a big deal. It might seem kind of nitpicky, but if you're doing anything long form, or you're going to be on the rate, or if you're going to be performing quite frequently, that stuff becomes annoying very fast, especially when somebody starts to recognize it and then they hear it all the time. So the best way out of that is to just combat it if you can. Like we said before too, articulation helps deal with plosives and sibilance. And then like I said before about the over-articulation is equally as bad. So we don't want the string too taut on when we're learning articulation, but it's good to have it, and to know when to back off and to not have it. So articulation is important. The next one I won't go over too much. It's just accent dialect is definitely like an aspect of a performance, and that can be regional. But when it comes to doing a performance, like in acting in general, like it might be a certain accent or a certain type of character you're trying to develop. So they might have a certain tick or a certain dialect that you have to pay attention to. Maybe not so much when you're just performing a script. Like I honestly don't do accents, and I don't do any different dialects. So this isn't one I really pay attention to too often, unless I'm, I mean, in the future, it'd be nice to expand my repertoire, but it's one to mention though, like it is part of the recipe as well. Okay, and the next we've kind of touched on already with the inflections, like we said before about ending up and how that can be a question, or it can make you sound insecure. Ending down is the final thought. Pitch range can also change the feeling of the energy of the script. If it's a low pitch range and you're just kind of staying at the same level, like that can have a different energy than you're trying to like talk like this, and then you're down like this, and you're really up here, and then you're really down here. See here. Oh yeah, and I mentioned too, yeah, when people are nervous, they tend to either go up in pitch or lower in pitch. And obviously it sounds unnatural and out of place, but I've noticed that with beginners who just get behind the microphone and they've not dealt with hitting record, and then now they're just like frozen all of a sudden and can't talk for some reason, or like have this giant booming radio voice out of nowhere. It's like, no, just talk. And then they get nervous, and then they have this higher pitch or this lower pitch, or it's not the way they normally sound. And it's like, no, we got to make you sound natural, not like you got some huge booming Prefontaine or radio voice or something. Yeah, we'll go. Okay. So the next is volume. I think we kind of touched on that already. And for your normal script you're going to be reading, obviously it's just going to be kind of something in the middle, but it's nice to just know the difference between loud and soft volume, not in the sense of like, this is how I perform really loud or this is how I perform really soft, but rather about this thing to remember is that when you're adjusting your volume, don't decrease your energy and tempo. It's so easy when you go really loud to like go faster or something like that. It's like to change something else as you're trying to go louder, but you can just go louder and not actually change any of the other things. But initially when people like talk louder, they tend to change these other aspects as well. So volume to me seems like an easy one, but a hard one. I guess they're all kind of easy once you see them, and then hard to learn to isolate them and to just tweak that individual one.
We have another question from David.
Actually, a comment. When it comes to volume, I like to think of it in comparison to a classical music performance.
Oh,
classical music has a huge dynamic range. You get super quiet parts and super loud booming parts. And yet with a properly conducted orchestra, the tempo is always right on and the energy is appropriate to the volume.
That's a really good point. That's perfect. Yeah, because sometimes you're being really quiet. Sometimes you're yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of dovetails into the next one, which I won't touch too much on. It's basically what we all bring. What I call it is the voice print, the quality of your voice. It's kind of what you bring to it. Now, granted, like if you get some performer, like some animation performer or something like that, they're gonna mess around with the quality of the print and try to, become more in the throat or something. But when we're just talking, we fit within a range of this in some form. Whether it's super nasally, it makes me think of Severus Snape on Harry Potter, like so nasally. I remember listening to an interview with him. Was it Alan Rickman? Yeah, I remember listening to an interview with him, and his acting coach or something told him, you'll never make it because no one likes that sound. Like no one likes the nasally sound. It's just not going to happen. So I love that story. But yeah, quality is important just because we each have our own voice print, the way that we sound, and that can change, through the day, like we've talked about, from the morning to the evening. But that's unique to each of us, how we present that. Now, there are a few things that one could work on that I think that could benefit over time, is like some physical state of like being breathy or hoarse or nasal. Like breathy makes me think, I mean, granted, you can be breathy and that's fine if the script requires it. But if that's just your normal way to talk, I think it has something to do with like shallow breathing. Like that you can't articulate too much because you're not projecting enough. You don't have that capacity, that air capacity to really push and really project. And then that's making you sound kind of airy and breathy. That's, I mean, not to say that's everybody, but when I hear a breathy sound that's not intended, I think of shallow breathing. I'm like, oh, I don't know. Like, are you just trying to compensate for that, Anyway. Okay. And this is kind of winding down here. So another aspect of the recipe are nonverbals, and this just goes with the performance in general, and it really depends on the script too, but is adding that this is the sort of improv world where you're adding the ers and the ums and the grunts and the breathing and really like livening the script, something that's not actually written down in the script, but something that you can add to the character that's conveying the information. And that might include, adding some, I don't know, just adding something to it that's not written there, that's just a nonverbal. Now, the problem with nonverbals too is sometimes if you manually take some of like the breaths out or things like that, like it can start to sound too polished, too unnatural. And it kind of depends on the script that you're performing, but taking out the breaths can be important, especially if you have a short script. Like I do a lot of like 30 second, 15-second spots, and they have to fit within that time. And in order to fit within that time, you got to be talking really fast. Like there's some scripts that I come in like 40 and I'm like, how am I supposed to get this in 30 without sounding like I'm rushing? But in those sorts of things, like you take out every breath. Obviously there's not a breath in there and there's going to sound completely unnatural. But when you're telling a story, like you're pausing and you're taking a breath. And this is where good breath control comes in, because you want to be breathing at the right spots. So you're not going back in post and try to take out breaths that shouldn't be where in that particular spot. And that just takes time and practice. Another thing I think we touched on before were the verbal tics. And this is something that it's one thing, I guess, to have a script in front of you. So I didn't notice those then, but I started doing this podcast with a friend of mine, and listening back to the show, I hear this all the time, and it just drives me insane, where it's the you knows and the anyways, and to be honest, and it's all those things. But like any of these techniques that you learn over time, it's like first step is to acknowledge that they exist. And second step is to try to talk more deliberately and try to talk them out of this, and then not automatically go to the you knows and all these other things, because they're everywhere. Like now that I see them, they're everywhere. I hear it in myself. I hear it in podcasts. I hear it everywhere. And, not everyone's as sensitive to them, but I think people over time, like the moment they hear it, like they actually hear it and they're like, oh, he's saying, a lot. Like all of a sudden now they hear it all the time. It's like when you see, I said it again. It's like when you see a particular kind of car, you want a particular kind of car, and then you start to see it everywhere. I feel the same way about these verbal tics. It's like you don't see them until you see them, and now you see them everywhere. But ultimately, it's like a lot of these things the goal here is to portray a message and a feeling, and to limit as much distraction as possible. And that includes getting rid of these verbal tics. Okay, let's see how we doing on time. We're getting pretty okay.
Yeah, we're at 4.
I just have a few more points.
I mean, we've gone over before. It's not really a big deal for us. If someone needs to leave, they can just drop a note in the chat, so that's fine.
Okay, and we're almost done too.
Okay,
pretty close. So this next one is actually one of the most important, I feel, because this gets down to like the nuts and bolts of like, as you're trying to say something, how you say it. And like I said before about when Ursula was asking about like marking up a script, this is definitely one thing that I mark up, because it's so easy to get stuck in this. If you have some writing in front of you and you're trying to perform it, is like you hit the wrong words. And one thing that I had a big issue with when I first started was hitting the same word over and over again. And the thing is, in normal conversation, like you might hit it once, but then you don't need to hit it again. Like you made your point. Now it's just like an afterthought. But here are just some examples of when to hit words, or they call it lifting, billboarding, but when you should hit a word. And essentially just lifting a word means, like it says down there, to raise your pitch on the accent syllable of the word. Like we've all done a million times, makes the word stand out, makes the word declarative, signals the end of a thought. So there are just different ways that you can use it. But a good thing to remember too, when it comes to hitting a word, is when you hit the word, don't increase your volume. Because I see that a lot where people are like, and now I'm going to go do this. It's like, no, like you don't raise your volume at all. Like you lilt the syllable, but that's it. Like, so now I'm going to go do this. You keep that volume the same. Another thing, like this to me was, I don't know why it blew my mind when I first learned this, but like that hitting different words in a sentence can actually change the meaning of a sentence. So, going back to like that NPR example that I used earlier, like she just did it. Like she always hit the last word, and she didn't really hit any other word, to where it's like, I don't understand the meaning of the sentence, because you're not hitting any of the proper words that you should. Like for example, this sentence, when are we going to the store? If you hit when, it's like, that's important. When are we going to the store? That's, like now it's about time. Or when are we going to the store? Now it's about us. When are we going to the store? Now it's about that awesome place that we've always wanted to go, or that we haven't gone to forever. It just changes depending on which word you do hit in the sentence. And just to give a few examples too about different ways that hitting words can change the meaning of a sentence. If you hit the pronoun, it can clarify the meaning. So, we're sorry, that is an invalid entry. Or if you can hit reference words. So, okay, I'll give a little performance here. Its performance, excitement, and commitment to quality make this the sports sedan of a lifetime. So like there, so hitting reference words can help reference what you're talking about. Hitting adverbs can help strengthen a point too. Step 1, carefully insert piece A into slot B. Hitting conjunctions can help bring extra enthusiasm to the script. So the company is best known for creating tools that utilize step and scan technology. Sorry, I went through that a little quick, but that'll be in the outline as well. Just these examples, but these are just some essential examples of just how hitting different words can change the meaning or of the point you're trying to enforce or what you're trying to convey. We talked about de-emphasis. So another thing that you can do with inversion or de-emphasis, including making a word a question, is that it can signal that there's more to follow. And like I mentioned this before, in that class, like lists, like we're all going to come into a list at some point. Like maybe not reading it on the air, but if you're at all behind a microphone, lists are always going to be in the picture in some way. So it's good to know like the proper way to approach a list when you see it. Now, when you come to a short list, like 3 items, like I have on here, the example, you can just invert the first 2. So you go up and you go up, and then the final one, you go down. So it'd be, why don't you grab the shovel, the rake, and the saw from the shed? So, So that's going to be like a shorter list. Now, of course, with every rule, there are ways to break the rule. And so there's actually a counter to this rule too, though. And it's that in a formal, if you're talking about something formal, particularly in like an educational piece or something like that, you actually want to end down or hit every word and end down. So for example, in this lesson, you'll learn about wormholes, pulsars, and cosmic inflation. See, so it's almost like highlighting each one on its own, isolated. Now, a way that I use to help me with this, because it took me for the longest time to try to break that, because like I see that and I just want to go up, especially if that's what I've learned. But a cheat thing is just put a period at the end of each thing on the list, and then you'll automatically go down, because every time we subconsciously see the period, we want to end down. So you'll learn to end down: wormholes, pulsars, and cosmic inflation. Okay, now the interesting part of lists is when you get a really long list, like, I don't know, I guess 5-10 items plus, you start to get into a different category of how you should approach this. Now, the first one is when you get like a moderate list, is you can just simply do the ladder technique. And all the ladder technique is you start low pitch, and then you end with a higher pitch. And what that's doing for the listener is it's telling them, okay, there's more to come. Like, so for example, like, why don't you grab the shovel, the rake, the saw, the toolbox from the shed? So you just go, but you can only go so far with that. You can't take it forever. It just becomes comical at some point. But you can also do the inverse, and you can start high and go low. So you can start, why don't you grab the shovel, the rake, the saw, and the toolbox from the shed? So you can just start, Now, the final one is when you have a long list, you got, I don't know, 10 things, something like that, longer than that even. But at that point, you're just doing pitch variation. And at that point, you just take in each one in particular. And I almost like to think about each item individually on its own, and just be like, why don't you grab the shovel, that rake, saw, toolbox, wheelbarrow, and like just try to change the inflection on each one so that it's keeping the listener engaged. Because over time, if you use the inversion, if you just go, they're just going to lose interest, and it's going to sound ridiculous and comical. And this is stuff we just do in natural conversation too, but just a good thing to keep in mind. Okay. And finally, I like to give a few other examples. So I gave the kind of the bad example earlier. I like to give a good example too. So I heard this, I don't know, like a month ago maybe, but his name's Blake Farmer, and he's on NPR, but he combined like all these ingredients so well. It sounds like he's talking to you. And if it's okay, I just want to play. It's pretty short. Play. Okay.
Well, spreading out across the country, in parts of the country, the fall colors have been beautiful this year.
You hear it?
But the change in the leaves doesn't do much for many people with color blindness. In Tennessee, the state's tourism department has been installing special viewfinders to give them a glimpse of the seasonal colors. Blake Farmer of Here and Now contributor WPLN in Nashville reports.
For most guys with color blindness, and it is predominantly men, the world appears in various shades of dull green. But with a little technology, Voila.
And it's a bunch of colors I haven't seen.
Jordan Whitehead is a 12-year-old from a small town outside Nashville. He has his eyes pressed against the holes of the viewfinder, looking at the hillsides across Radnor Lake. They're showing the first blotches of fall color. He says he didn't realize trees have multiple hues.
Now I'm looking at this one tree, and it's like yellow and orange.
The viewfinders have a special lens in them to keep colors from overlapping in the brain, what causes colorblindness in the first place. They're donated by Enchroma, which developed the technology. Glass scientist Don
Can you hear some of
McPherson.
those things, like the way he hit Enchroma? Like, this is something interesting that we need to talk about. Like, this is the thing, Enchroma. And also the way at the beginning, he sped up his tempo when he was saying, like, that there are these glasses, mostly for men. Like, it was just kind of a throwaway line. Like, well, that's important. I mean, he did mention it, but it's also not the main point that I'm trying to make. So it's just like he upped the tempo really fast, and then he moved on. He like went down really quick. They call it a throwaway line, but essentially that's what it is. When you're having a conversation and you want to add something else, you put it in there, and you speed up the tempo. You might change your pitch a little bit, kind of like he did. Yeah, he said, what did he say? Yeah, he said the glasses. Yeah. Anyway. Okay, good. And then, another example too, that I don't know, maybe I'm a little biased, but I really like is Kai Ryssdal. He's the marketplace guy on NPR, but he has the best pause at the beginning, like the dramatic pause at the beginning of his show. I was going to play it really, really quick, if that's okay.
Just add metal at metal.equinix.com.
Volatility is back, it seems, and not just in the markets either, but kinda in the national economic mood, From American Public Media, this is Marketplace.
See, I love Kai. I think he does a great job in animating himself and really like exploring the pitch and stretching sentences and slowing things down and really trying to make it as conversational as possible. Like, I don't know what it is. I guess I'm a little biased, but I really feel like I'm there with him in the room as he's just talking, and like he's just telling me the news just to me. He does these. If you're looking for good examples, he's a great example of using a lot of these techniques and using them well. He even like went a little higher and we might go down here, so it's just, he sounds so natural, but he's got these scripts in front of him and he's just reading off of them. So I think he's really good. Okay. And then finally, just a few final tips, and we're almost done, is how to read to sound natural. Obviously, if you're going to have a script in front of you, you're going to be reading it. First thing I'd mention is reading laterally. And essentially that just means, reading 2 to 3 words ahead of the word that you're currently reading out loud. This can be good for a couple reasons. One, if you're doing a cold read, or you haven't actually seen the script before, you know what's coming up before you actually get to it. Also, it just gives you a heads up about what's coming up, so you can prepare yourself and you can give the proper inflection at the right time. Like, if you've marked up a script and you can see that hit word is coming, like, to give it the proper lilt at the proper time. Easier said than done, but I think of all the things that I've learned that's so hard to learn, this one has paid dividends. As we talked about before, imagine who you're talking to and act like it's their ear. And just some final thoughts too, like adding variety to a script, like that Kai Ryssdal script, like he was changing his pitch variation. He uses that dramatic pause. And like even the guy before in that article, like, I didn't play the whole thing, but he would like stretch out words and really give certain things texture. So paying particular attention, not just by hitting a word, but by stretching it out, you can actually give it some other meaning just by giving it a little flavor by, stretching it out. Varying the tempo obviously is very important, and above all, avoid repetition. And it's so easy to get caught in these phrase patterns, and repeatedly hitting the same words over and over again. Like I said before, you're going to lose your listener really fast if you don't even know the subtext behind the information you're sharing. Then neither is the listener. So you first have to know what words to hit and when to hit them, and then they'll fall into your lap. Final tips. This is, smiling is so important. I don't know why, but it just comes through in the way how you talk. Posture is very important. Obviously, this goes back to the breathing technique, and it doesn't matter if you're sitting or standing. Now, I prefer to stand when I'm doing any sort of recording whatsoever, like I'm standing right now, and it just helps me like fully engage like my breathing, and allows me to like move around and like get down here if I need to and do whatever needs to be done. But breathing technique isn't precluded by if you're sitting, though. It's still important. Mind your P's and S's, said. Another thing is to move. Like, it's important to actually like move, and like it really changes the way you approach things if you like do something different with your voice, you know, or you do something different with your physical expression. It changes things, you know. So the way that you move around, even if it's just like you're trying to like present a point, and so you're talking like this. Oh my gosh, you guys, you got to hear this. Like, it's important to use your hands, because that's what we do in normal, you know, conversation. But if you're just like sitting there straight and trying to be conversational, you're not going to do it, because you're going to sound rigid because you are. And finally is paying attention to a conversation around you, and you'll see all these ingredients in action. And that goes for paying attention to like just conversations in general. But I started to see it in myself, like how I, you know, present material and how I try to convey a certain emotion. And it's really interesting to see how, you know, just unconsciously we do this all on our own. But then to transfer that to reading material and taking somebody else's thought and doing that, it's so hard, but it's a worthy journey. And then finally, like we talked about, pay attention to verbal tics. Try to combat them as best as you can. And that is it. Thank you for letting me mumble on here for so long. Does anybody have any questions? Any other questions?
Looks like Marcus has a question.
Yeah. Well, first, thank you for doing this here and sharing this with us. I look forward to sharing it with our DJs here. Just two things. For me, with my repeated phrases, I'll keep a little sticky note and put it on my laptop and just catch them as so it's right in front of me all the time.
That's a good idea.
Beyond that, going back to mic technique, our station, not sure why, but it's equipped with SM57s and I just wonder what like the best approach for talking into those microphones that aren't really made specifically for voice.
SM57, that's a dynamic Shure.
Yeah, it's made for instruments. But yeah.
Yeah, I've never used the SM57. I've used the SM7B, and all I know if they're similar in any way is that, man, you can get pretty close to those things. I mean, they're like, do you have to use a cloud lift or anything on the SM57, or is it the gain's fine?
Yeah, it's pretty straight up. Honestly, it has some pretty loud gain on it, but it's like the accompanying one's the SM58, which is made for vocals, and then the instrumental version is the SM57. But if you're not familiar with it, then no worries there.
Right. Well, the only thing I can think of is like the condensers are just more forgiving when it comes to certain vocal techniques or plosives or sibilance or things like that. Sorry, I don't have more for you, Marcus.
It's all good. Thank you very much for answering.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Stephanie, this is Heather.
Yeah.
I don't have a question. I'm just wanting to thank Brett so much. I've been a part of media for decades, and I've never had a presentation like this. So thank you. Here I was going down in my comment. I'm going to be very conscious of it now, but thank you so much. I'm looking forward to getting the recording and also sharing this with our producers here in Atlanta. I'd love to do that. So thank you.
Well, thank you for saying that, Heather. That means a lot. I appreciate that.
Oh no, it was just great.
Yeah, and the outline, which is basically all this material too, I'll send over to, and some of it's just good to reference, just if you ever need to reference some particular things, it's just nice to have some sort of cheat sheet or something with you.
Yeah, you have a lot of nice things you can practice that you share.
Yeah.
Brett, one of the things that I've noticed in with working with a lot of recordings is how many weird extra sounds people make that that I edit out when I'm listening to them, but I hear them on recordings. Are a lot of those sounds because of dry mouth? Is that mostly what's causing all those sounds?
What kind of sounds? I mean,
people make all sorts of sounds when they talk. And
well, I mean, it can go into the detail too. Like, I mean, right, if bodily sounds in general can come out over the microphone if it's super sensitive, and that can go for like right after you eat. I know some people you can tell right after they've eaten. I mean, I'm probably a little more sensitive to hearing things than just in general, but I would say my natural inclination would be that it's just dehydration.
Yeah.
Just staying hydrated.
The chat said lip smacking and clicking.
Yep, exactly. Clicking and lip smacking is definitely dehydration, especially the clicks. The clicks are the worst enemy, because like they make processors that can apparently declick or get them out of there, but they don't do like a perfect job. And then to go through and manually take those out is just laborious. So the best way to combat that, is hydration. I'd say hydration, or if you can hear it, or if you can see it, more importantly, I think, is if you can see it in the recording. Like when I'm recording and I'm recording something or whatever, and I stop it and I look right at the waveform, I can see it right away. You can just see like all the mouth clicks and stuff. When that happens, it's like, well, something's got to change here before I keep going. So, do whatever you can, like take a swig of water, lemon water to me is a great, works great. Like that acid just cuts through the mucus, I think.
So it might be a good idea to provide guests with water, like a glass of water, just so that they don't have a dry mouth, right?
Definitely. Yeah. And I hate to say that, it may sound weird, but having just lemon juice on hand is, I mean, the right people will know. I know it like at agencies and stuff, for like places like production houses, like they have green apples set out too. But having water there is definitely important.
Let's see. Any other questions? Did you have a question?
Does anybody have a question about the business of voice acting? Just to make sure if anybody's curious about that. I know we're all radio people, but
the radio thing.
Yeah, well,
straight up radio.
Yeah, it sounds like we're going with radio here, so you're off the
hook. But thank you, Brett. This was just a wealth of information, and you have so many wonderful details. I learned something new every time. Oh, hold on.
Question.
One more question from Laurel. You're on the air, Laurel. Oh, okay.
What?
She's got a call in.
Huh?
I'm not sure. Maybe she's just... Well, while Laurel is calling, I just want to say thank you so much, Brett. This was wonderful.
Well, I just want to thank you as well, Ursula, Stephanie, for setting this up and making this happen, and for everyone for taking the time and your attention and engaging in everything. It means a lot. I appreciate that a lot too.
Yeah, and I think this will be a great resource. I'm sure many people will come back to it. I know I'm going to. So.
Oh yeah, we're recording.
Can't take it back.
I guess one more question I had while we wait for Laurel, and I know that I've asked you this before, but any tips on how to combat the habit? Like just how
the habit.
How to break yourself of the thing.
So hard. The tics I feel are the hardest, like more so than the techniques, because the techniques, they don't need to go away. They just need to be made aware of them, and then to toy around with them and modify them and see where it takes you. But when the tics come, it's like they're so deeply ingrained and they're just supposed to be gone. And so it's hard when it's just something that you've been doing for years and years and years, and all of a sudden you have to take that away. Now, I think it's something automatically that, I mean, it doesn't necessarily serve this purpose or wasn't intended to as an exercise, but it could, it's actually a tempo exercise where you start with a script and you started at your normal pace or whatever, and then you go really slow and like comically slow to where you're going so slow And then, so like as you slow, then you start to bring it back up, and then you come back to normal, and then you go super fast, and you continue to go fast and really fast, and then you go, and then so you try to go like up and down and bring it back. And I could maybe see that helping, because, and maybe not even just like having a script, but actually just talking, because if you're talking and you're paying attention to your tempo and trying to adjust that, like you have no time to say like, or or stuff or something like that. You almost have to force yourself to not say those things. I don't know. It's just a guess. I'm just throwing it out there.
So is a placeholder. Is that what it is?
Right. Yeah. Well, it can be a placeholder. There are certain ways to use it. A placeholder either to signal that I still have the floor in a conversation, or to just signal to the listener to know that there's more to come. It just gives you time to think, I need to say something else. So it just gives you that space. It just gives you that space.
Right. And that's universal too. Like in French, they don't say they say
Oh. Well, and what makes me think of too is just the comfort of silence, or how uncomfortable it is, especially when you're on the air, or I said it right now, is learning to, we want to fill the void with sound, especially when you're talking to somebody else in an interview or something like that. So it makes it uncomfortable to have that fake or that silence, and maybe the helps fill that void. That it might help to just be comfortable with the silence, or to lean into that silence and not be so worried about having a bit of silence.
Yeah, I think it can actually help to have that properly placed pause.
Like just that happened just now.
Kind of intense.
When I look at examples too. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and so I'm constantly looking at how they present and how they comport themselves and what sort of verbal tics they have and things like that. And I found a few that I really admire, and I try to get to that point that they are at, where, like, an example I give is Sam Harris. Just the way that he articulates himself, and then he, instead of filling the void, he just stops, and then he continues on, and it's just very fits together, as opposed to just this constant adding the verbal tics to fill the void or something like that.
Right.
But having examples too helps.
Yeah. Like it might be just like an anxiety thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Laurel is back, right?
And Laurel is back.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay, so first of all, I also wanted to thank you for this presentation. I found it very interesting and helpful, and it was very well presented, so thank you.
Thank you.
What I wanted to ask you is this. So I'm interested in doing some voice work. Obviously, like right now, I would be a total newbie. Like, I'm not a professional voice actor or anything like that. I'm just getting started. But I was told I work at another radio station, a different radio station, my day job, and I've from time to time, they've let me do a little spots for them. So I think I actually have the talent for it. But it's very difficult to find work. So like somebody was telling me that, doing like audiobooks or something like that, there's a website you can go to if you want to, do some audiobooks. There's websites you can go to for doing like Kovaco. I don't know if you know what that is, but they have supposedly a lot of work you can do that's very simple, just like radio spots, commercials kind of thing. And I was just wondering, like, first of all, like, do you know of any actual places that I could go to get real work or to get practice? And then secondly, what are the best practices as far as like doing a short, simple commercial, or to apply for a job like that. You know, I have a couple of things I've done before. I've heard the word reel, REEL, used, audio reel, but like I have no idea what I'm doing. So if you had any advice about that, that would be awesome.
Sure. Yeah. Well, the basic path that I tell anyone who is interested is first first find a coach, somebody that and do some research and find somebody that you can work with, because, and the reason I say that's the first thing is because if you just go out and be like, oh, I'll just listen to others and learn for myself and try to practice or whatever, is you can get stuck in habits that are bad that you're going to have to now undo, which is going to take more time to undo because you've developed them over time because of improper training. So I suggest finding a coach to just like work with you personally on certain techniques to where you can, because the truth is we all have these bad habits when it comes to reading or whatever, we're vocal performance. And so it's trying to unlearn those things, and it's so hard, and you can't do it without a coach. So I would say first thing is finding a coach, and then second is a community and some good information. And actually a site that I'm a member of that I recommend, I'm not affiliated or whatever, but I recommend, it's called Gravy for the Brain. And it's something that I wish I had when I first started, because what it is they do webinars all the time. They have forums. They have webinars about mic technique, about acting technique, from everything from audiobooks. They have about business and how to find an agent, how to, what you need on your demos and all this stuff. And it's just so much information, and it pays itself off 100-fold. Especially, pay yourself off with your first job. So I recommend that too. They have so much good information there. And then there will be a point when you'll be ready to record a demo, and that'll be your business card. And that's the point where you start marketing. But, the first stages of the game are just finding a coach and finding a community with good information that you can sit in on classes and ask questions. And the forums are great too on that site, because you can say, hey, I have this audition, and then you put it in there, and then they'll critique it like the coaches will. Like they'll give you an honest critique of it, like that's good information, that's that'll benefit you. It's not just amateurs, they're blind leading the blind. It's people, it's professionals giving honest opinions. So does that help?
Yes, very much. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, thanks, Laurel. And let's see, I just wanted to mention Marcus's comment. He just said that one tip for when he's live on the air, he has a music bed that helps him to avoid using ums and use pauses instead. So, good tip, Marcus.
That's a great idea.
Lots of thank yous today in the chat, and thank you again from us one more time. It was a treat to have you, Brett. Thank you.
Well, yeah, thank you, everyone, and thank you for the awesome questions and the engaging conversation. It was wonderful.
All right. Yay.
Hey, Brett, can you name your podcast real quick?
Oh, I don't know if I want to.
No.
Oh, we it's called the Iki Guys.
Oh, okay.
It's a show about Japanese philosophy.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks.
Don't judge us too harshly.
IKI, Iki Guys.
Yeah, IKIGUIS.
Iki Guys. Okay.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Like the Japanese concept of ikigai.
Oh.
Like life purpose, but then it's two of us chatting about it, so we're the Iki Guys. it's silly.
Nice.
It's an outlet. Yes.
But I bet there's good vocal technique. I hope, or I hope so anyway.
He is also a fellow voice actor, so yeah, we do throw that in there a little bit.
Awesome. Thanks.
Well, thank you all so much. It means the world to me, and for your attention and everything. Thank you. And Ursula, Stephanie, I appreciate you setting this up and making this happen. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. And everyone, enjoy the rest of your evening. And thank you for the birthday song. That was so sweet.
Yeah, happy birthday, Stephanie.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.